Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Jenn Todling, author of Dancing on My Own 2 Feet. Welcome, Jenn.
Hi, Terry. It's so nice to be here.
It is wonderful to have you. I truly enjoyed the book. But before we dive in, why don't you give the readers just kind of like a quick overview of what they're going to find when they open up the cover of Dancing on My Own 2 Feet?
Yeah, and thank you for that. So this is my memoir, so it's a very personal journey. I like to say there's a lot of magical adventures and a lot of fun, but before we get to that part, you have to kind of suffer through some trials and tribulations. So if you can stick it out, it turns into a really beautiful story that I feel like contrasts my life of sort of living in black and white and then what it's like to live in color. And so I hope you enjoy that journey.
Oh, I love that. I love the idea of living in black and white versus color. That's a wonderful way to put it. I'm really curious, what made you decide that you wanted to write your story? Writing a memoir is a very personal thing, and a lot of people just, they don't want everyone to know. What made you say, I have a story that needs telling?
Yeah, I would say probably a decade before I wrote it, I felt I started a blog when I moved to New York City, and I had started to share some of my personal stories. And so this memoir started as sort of a short story. And I felt like, okay, maybe that's enough to sort of say, hey, I went through something challenging and came to the other side. But it kept kind of percolating in the background. And I would say about a decade later, I just had during the pandemic, this moment, I think a lot of us had these awarenesses of how do we want to live our life. And I felt this need to share this story. And I think at that time I had enough distance that I wasn't as emotionally charged with what happened. So I could have some perspective. And I just had this innate, like I had to write the story. And my editor and my publisher have said, like, write the story you have to tell, because once you go through the book writing process, publication, like it's a long journey. And so if this isn't something, and I don't think I really appreciated that going in. I was like, I got to get this down. I got to publish it. And looking back, I'm like, wow, like if you don't really have to tell that story, it becomes hard to get through it. So
it's long and you're involved in it a long time. And if you're not really invested in it after a while, you're like,
Well, 100%. And I think for me, I wanted it to be a source of inspiration and hope for people that might be in situations where they feel stuck. And so I think that was I just had this innate need, like this has to get out there. And then going through that, I was like, oh, this is a pretty vulnerable process. Like, what am I doing?
Yes, it is. So that leads me so easily into the next question, which was like, what was the hardest part of this process for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually an easy question to answer. The hardest part was the developmental edit. And that was because I wrote the manuscript in about 8 months. I thought I was ready to publish in my lovely book.
I don't want you to feel bad. We all feel that way.
Yeah.
When I had my first manuscript and I turned it in and I got it back from the editor, I cried for 2 days.
Yeah. I mean, my book coach was very lovely. She was like, I don't think you're there yet. And so I hired an editor, and that was really painful because it wasn't, I mean, this is my first book. And so there obviously was like writing critiques and, making sure it flowed, but it was life choices that were on display. And it was unpacking like, well, why did you make this choice? And the reader needs to understand the stakes. Like, I don't understand it. And so I had to do a lot of self-reflection and really understand, like, why did I make that choice? And that, I mean, every time I'd get the edits back, it would be like, oh my gosh, it's going to be okay. But yeah, the crying, the emotions, like that was like therapy all over again.
Absolutely. And I was going to say that when writing the memoir, there is a lot of therapy involved in terms of like finding things, hidden gems that you kind of have forgotten or that you stuffed away somewhere and never really looked at.
Yeah.
And so this idea of finding the why, like, why did you make that choice?
Yeah. And honestly, I think some of that has continued even after the book has been out. So now people are seeing themselves in the story, or they're reflecting what they see in the story. And some of that's been really validating, like, oh, I'm not crazy. And then part of it's also been like, that continues to be hard for me, so it's a journey.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything in particular that you're willing to share that you learned during the writing process about this journey that you've been on?
Yeah. I mean, I I think the other part that was really challenging for me was actually the publicity. So I did like a mini book tour this summer after the book came out, and I was very active on social media. I did a lot of events, a lot of book clubs, bookstores. That was really vulnerable for me, and I had a lot of vulnerability hangovers. I realized I actually don't like a lot of this self-promotion being so visible. I'm a pretty open book in my, personal life. I will share anything. But I think the public aspect of that was really hard for me. And so there's an essence when I kind of had my last, in-person book tour event, I had a lot of relief, honestly, because I was like, okay, I don't have to keep promoting and getting people to sign up. Like now I can just be. So I think that was interesting for me to just observe.
Yeah, absolutely. So as someone who lived in an emotionally abusive relationship for 14 years, me, and reading your first marriage and all that it entailed, I had a lot of feels.
Yeah. Did you feel it in your body?
Yeah. There was a lot of going on as I'm reading it. And then not only that, but there were times that I was yelling at young you, get out, get out, don't marry, walk away. It's interesting how when you read someone else's memoir and it intersects in any way on your own life experiences, how it comes up.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was part of, I tried to illustrate as thoughtfully as I could, right? What it felt like for me to be in that situation. And in my body. Right. And so, and the reaction you had actually, when I presented like my opening scene to my book group, they were doing the same thing, like, get out, stop. And that was validating for me too. Like I couldn't see it then. Right. And so it's like, okay, you can dissect it. But that is really powerful, right? And our body holds a lot of those emotions. And I think that was a learning thing for me too, through this process is I still have some trauma trapped in my body, that I'm trying to work through, honestly.
Absolutely. So I rode across the United States on a tandem bicycle, and I tell people that it healed me from those 14 years of trauma. And it did in a lot of ways. And yet I still have what we've come to term as swamp gas. And it's when all of a sudden someone like sticks a stick down into the swampy area and all of that ooze comes up and bubbles and stinks and whatnot. But it was under the surface and perfectly fine until you stirred it. And that happens sometimes where someone accidentally, unbeknownst to them, says or does something that immediately comes this like visceral reaction that I'll have. And I'll think, I'm healed enough now that I can stop and go, whoa, what is that? And where is it coming from? Whereas before it used to rule me, that reaction would then rule whatever I was going to do for the next who knows how long until I finally got myself under control again. And now at least I can say, whoa, what is that? And why is this happening? But that's what happened when I was reading your book. Several times it was like, ooh, someone's stirring the swamp.
I know. Well, there's another author I did an event with recently, and she has it was slightly different because she had kids. So she was navigating like a similar relationship through custody. But I had the same reaction when I read her book. I was like, oh gosh, like I feel it. So I understand what you're saying. I was like, oh, I feel it. I know I need to get this out of me a little bit. Like it's still there. Yeah.
That was crazy. Were there any pieces that you, like stories maybe, that you wish that you had put in the book, but you didn't? Like due to, I don't know, like maybe an editor said you don't need this piece or.
Yeah. I mean, I kept a lot of my childhood out of the final memoir. In earlier drafts, there was a lot more of my childhood and kind of, I think, just understanding like what it was like. My parents got divorced when I was young, and I sort of, took care of some of my younger siblings. And so I had a lot more of that in there. I think I'm okay not having it in there. And I think, it's funny. There's like the opening scene. I'm 13 years old. I'm kind of dancing in this nightclub, and both of my parents they both had the same reaction on how I described that nightclub, because they were like, this was a very classy place. And, my dad was the manager, but I kind of had this perception that it was a little dingy. And so I thought that was interesting. And I was like, well, this is my 13-year-old brain remembering it. Right. But yeah.
Isn't that a cool thing though, the way memories work?
Yeah.
Your memory versus someone else's memory. I sit around it at Christmas time and I'm always amazed because my kids will say, do you remember that time? And they start talking and it's like, that never happened.
Yeah.
I was in that house with you. I am positive, but it did for them.
Exactly. So that was interesting to me that they both had that same reaction. So I feel good about what was in there. I feel like I told enough to get the feeling right in your body. Right. And I try to be delicate on, just that balance. So I don't think there's anything I would have added at this point.
Is there anything now that it's out and people have read it and they know everything? Is there anything you wish you didn't tell?
I don't think so either. I think I was really nervous because the book covers my wedding night. Right. And I was like, my coworkers are going to read this. And I have had some conversations even with my, male colleagues about those scenes, and they've been fine and fun. Right. So I think I had a lot of, because there's just this, again, that vulnerability, this conservativeness a little bit. Right. And that I was nervous about that, but I think I was most nervous about some of my coworkers, and they've been super supportive and have loved it. So I think I'm proud of what is in there.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not saying you had anything to be. I just know that when you put yourself out on the line, sometimes there's that second guessing of, oh, should I have said that? Should I have? Yeah,
I think I felt that, but then the reality has been it's been well received. Now, I would say the first half of the book sometimes is hard when that is the main focus of the conversation, right? So some of the book clubs I've gone, we've only talked about that, and that gets a little draining for me. There's so much more, right? That's happening.
Right. There's parts 2 and 3.
There's parts 2 and 3. Yeah. Right? Can we talk about that?
Right.
So I think that I just acknowledge that's a part that, I have healed mostly from, kind of as you describe, but I am putting out there publicly. And so I'm, just being comfortable talking about that really for the first time in a public setting. And that's new for me.
Right. And it can be a little overwhelming, I think.
100%.
To say, I'm going to be incredibly vulnerable here, and I'm going to tell a story that doesn't necessarily put you in the best light.
Yeah.
Not that you ever did anything wrong per se, but we can look and say, Jen, you made some really basic mistakes here. You married a guy that you had questions about, that you hardly knew.
Yep. All the things. Yep.
Right. And it's easy as an adult woman with experience looking back to say, oh, Jen.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
Yeah.
But at the time you were young.
Yeah. I was 20, and it's interesting because I'm teaching on campus at a university this semester, and I have 20, maybe 20-year-olds in my class. And I think it's given me a little bit of empathy for myself. These are babies. They're babies.
You think you know so much.
I thought I did. I
remember knowing I was an adult, and at about 30, 35, recognizing I hadn't been an adult, and I'm barely one now.
Yeah.
And so in that stage, and you're making these major life decisions.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Some of that I'm unpacking now. So I have a 7-year-old. And so as a parent, I'm trying to teach her to advocate for herself, to honor her needs. And I realized I actually never learned how to do that myself. And I think that was part of the reason why I ended up making some of the choices that I did. And so I'm trying to do that now, 26 years later. And it's not easy, but it's just good awareness for me to be this is a skill I didn't really learn.
Right. And I don't think that it is unusual.
Yeah.
To grow up, especially as a female, and not be able to advocate for yourself, because generally, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it's better now. Maybe it's, I'm 62, so maybe it's better now than it was. But I know growing up, girls were just supposed to get along to get along.
I think there's still some of that good girl conditioning in our society.
Yeah,
sure.
where you're just you smile, and you're the caregiver, and some of that I think is a natural, just we got a lot of estrogen and that makes us caregivers. I mean, we almost can't help ourselves, but it's almost used against us. Like, this is what you do. You care for others, and others always come before you. And then when you do speak out, then you're given, names that tell you what you are to the world. And so you want to avoid those. And so you become don't know how to speak up for yourself. So I don't think that you were completely like the only person out there who didn't know how to speak up for herself. And I love the fact that you recognize that, and you're trying to teach your 7-year-old that she can be both a girl and someone who knows what she wants and knows how to ask for it.
Yeah. And
she can do both.
Yeah. And she'll ask me, right? Like, can you text my teacher and ask this question? And I will have resistance because I'm like, oh God, I don't, and I have to like pause and be like, because that's my stuff I haven't worked on. Right. Or I'm not practiced in it. So I think that has been really empowering, just even through this process, to say, this is my story. And I can own, some of those decisions. And I can say, this is, I'm okay with what's right for me now.
So let's move on so that we don't spend the whole time.
Let's do it.
So you, as a young child, loved to dance. And then in this first marriage, that piece of you disappeared. Yep. You also had a great desire to travel. And that piece of you, it's not that it disappeared, it was still there, but the ability to do these things was completely gone. It was removed. You were unable because of everything else that you had taken on in this marriage. You finally get out of this marriage. You find a way to walk away, which, by the way, that whole piece, that little,
I know.
Yeah. But anyway, you finally get away from that, and dance and travel come back to your life. And then they kind of come back together, or you make them come back together, which I absolutely love. Let's talk a little bit about that and why you think you went toward like dance and why you went toward travel as a way to find who you were.
Yeah. And I think this is where that contrast comes in. So I literally spent a decade feeling like very, very constricted and limited in my experiences, right? So I had this great sense of adventure and this great desire to, experience the world. And all of that was not feasible in those sort of 10 years. And so when I came out of that, I think I just had this incredible desire to live in color, so to speak, right? And to try new things. And so when I moved to New York City, New York City also was just a magical canvas for me during that time, because the energy of the city is amazing, and the access to arts and, theater and language, like it's just, I think had I been somewhere else, it probably would have looked different, but that was the magic of that moment. And so I literally was just like a sponge, like what can I soak up? Right. And so I started with some singing, I started with Italian classes. And then when I sort of saw this dance studio, I had never danced in partnership. I grew up doing ballet and jazz. And I sort of, saw, this ballroom dance studio. And I'm like, this is interesting. And it took a minute, to find the courage to do that. But once I was there, it also was this sense of community that I tapped into, and I started to make friends, and my brain and my body were just like transported to just an amazing place, right? And I became hooked, honestly. I literally was there every single day after work for 3 to 4 hours, and it just became part of who I was. And then, I started to integrate that with my travels. So I just had this hunger to experience life, hunger to see the world and all these places I wanted to see. And I was like, check, like we're going. And I think that it was a pretty magical time.
Yeah. I think that the fact that you chose ballroom dancing, couples dancing, as a vehicle to heal after essentially an abusive relationship, it was emotional abuse and neglect. That's kind of crazy, because part of me, I think I would have said, yeah, there's no partnering happening at all in any phase of my life. I'm going to do everything solo. And the first thing that you kind of do is you walk in and you say, I'm going to be vulnerable again. And I'm going to not only dance, which is something you haven't done in a long time, but I'm going and dance something you've never danced before, but I'm going to do it in tandem with someone else and hope that they don't laugh at me or I don't know, find me ridiculous. Do you know what I'm saying? I just found that really awe-inspiring.
Yeah. And honestly, I wasn't thinking about it, right? I think if I had unpacked it, I probably wouldn't have gone. Right. I think there was probably a need inside of me to have some healthy touch and physical connection, not in a romantic way, but just, and I found some partners that, weren't hitting on me, that weren't going to, that were just like safe friends. And I think that helped a lot. I had some partners who were really safe to be sassy and playful with, but I knew like it wasn't going to cross the line. Right. And so I think there was just this pull that I again, same with like writing the memoir. I just kind of followed the breadcrumbs, like one of my author friends would say, and then it ended up being what I needed. But I think if I had overthought it, I probably would have been like, no. Like, what am I doing?
So I'm really glad you didn't overthink it because as the reader, I was overthinking it for you. And I thought, wow, that's really fascinating to me because myself having gotten out of a relationship, the way I handled it for a while was I'm never going to be in a relationship again of any kind, like romantic, any kind. I'm going to do life on my own. And that way I can't get hurt again. If you don't open yourself up, then people can't crawl in there and hurt you. And then I'm watching you and I'm thinking, well, that was a healthier way to handle it.
Well, and I would say too, like, I don't cover this because but there were like, I did have a little bit of healing, I think, from relationships before I moved to New York. So I did do some dating in California. Okay. So I think that there was a little bit of a bridge that helped. Then I was in a more healed spot physically when I moved to New York, for context. I think that probably made more sense.
Made it a little easier. I also enjoyed how you talked about when you started doing private lessons and you had two different teachers that you talked about, and one that was very attuned to you and what your needs were, and one that was not, and how you didn't know how to handle even in a situation in which you were paying someone to be your teacher.
Yeah.
Right. You were paying to have this experience where it would have been perfectly okay for you to say, this isn't working for me this way. And yet you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about this idea of like, how long did it take you to finally be able to say to people, I don't like that. I don't want that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was part of my healing journey, right? It was these baby steps of honoring my needs, right? So I had one instructor that it was very easy because he was like on board with me, right? I'm like, let's be creative and fun and playful. And it was easy. And the other that was just a little bit more traditional, right? And I could appreciate that. But that was a trigger for me of like reminding that I didn't know how to honor my needs. And I tried, and then I kind of got this pushback. And I think that's something I continue to struggle with. And some of it's my social style. Like I'm a more amiable social style, right? Like that push and pull, the conflict. Right. But I think part of the journey too was just learning to be honest with myself that this is what's important to me. And that's valid, like period, the end.
Right.
And so
you don't have to explain it.
I don't have to explain it. So that's probably been a multi-year journey that I'm still on of just like, no is a complete answer. You don't, like it is like, I don't want to. And I think I've gotten better at that. Even in my personal life, like I don't actually want to go to that event. So I'm not going to, and not feeling guilty about it.
Right. Right. I think that's something that I struggle with as well, is the ability to say, no, thank you.
Yeah.
And move on and not have to say, no, thank you, because here are my 18 reasons and my list of why this wouldn't be a good fit for me. And then I end up finding myself doing it anyway. Yeah. Because they've found a way to make me feel guilty enough that it's like, okay, fine, I'll do it, even though I don't want to.
Yeah. And I've learned to just say, and you can do it with kindness, right? You can say, okay, thank you so much for thinking of me. I'm at capacity right now. I'm not going to be able to do that, but I wish you the best, or I'll share it with my friends or whatever, or just, I have a conflict and people don't need to know what that conflict is.
Right. And the conflict couldn't be, I don't want to.
I want to be home by myself and do whatever I want to do.
Absolutely. I also really enjoyed watching the romances. So you had one where you met someone you believed was your soulmate,
Yeah.
right? And then you met who I'm assuming is your husband now.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just don't want to make
Yeah.
too many
Still married.
Okay, still married. And the difference between those two. And I'm just curious now at this point, you're beyond, you're well into your marriage, and you're beyond the soulmate. Do you believe in soulmates?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's because I think that puts a lot of pressure that it's like there's this one person or these,
Right.
That you have to find. I think that it's a lot about compatibility, right? And I think, even in my first marriage, we didn't want the same lifestyle. And so that became apparent. And I think that can be a deal breaker in a relationship. Like, do you want kids? Do you want to live in suburbia? Do you want to travel the world? Do you want to own a house? Like, these are things that if you're not aligned, make for a challenging relationship. And so
Absolutely.
I think that's where this concept with, the person I ended up marrying, this concept of the soul equal is more like, are you aligned in your values? Are you aligned with how you want to show up in the world? And that might still look very different. Like, my husband and I are very different people. But we're aligned on, like, generally where we want to head and the things that are important to us. So I think that's more important than this concept of like, this is my soulmate. And I think you can kind of romanticize that, and it might not mean that's the best fit for you.
Right. And I think sometimes that soulmate idea, when you meet someone and have that immediate attraction and you think this must be my soulmate, I think we can be immediately attracted to someone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be right for us.
100%.
Because that initial attraction, there's a lot of just physical and hormonal things, right, that happen that you just are like, oh my gosh, I'm so attracted. But real life, like you said, do you want children? And the person that you felt was your soulmate, I think there were some things about him that were exactly what you needed at the moment.
I agree.
You needed someone who was laid back and easygoing and didn't require much of you. And that's what you needed then. And it felt so good and so right because you had been in this relationship where everything was so rigid that to have this ability to be who you were. But after a while, you realized it doesn't really fit me.
Yeah.
I like a little more structure than this.
Yeah. And that was part of my growth and healing. Like, I think there are parts of that relationship that I still take with me. Like, there is this desire to kind of, be a little bit more easygoing and laid back and bring that European culture. And I struggle with that sometimes too, because I like the structure. But I think that made me take myself a little less seriously. And I think that's healthy. And I think we did connect on a level that, like, we could understand each other. And I think that there was like a core understanding of what's important to us that was aligned, but the practicality of making a relationship work wasn't there. Yeah.
And I think that's really an interesting thing to recognize, especially after being in a difficult relationship for years and years and years, to be able to say, this is beautiful and not what I need.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think you're exactly right. For that moment, that was what I needed. And it gave me just a beautiful experience of the world, right? To just really have a cultural, international relationship, so to speak.
Well, and I think too, to just be free to experience life as it comes for someone who had been trapped for a long time, unable to experience life at all, let alone as it comes. Everything that you did was, even when you showered and when you cooked was on a timetable that wasn't of your own making.
Exactly.
You were waking at 3 a.m. to do things that no person should have to be up doing at 3 a.m. So then to have this experience of someone who was more or less, let's just stop for coffee.
Yeah. Let's go take a coffee and let's drink wine. And
you're like, okay, we're having wine for breakfast. Okay. Then, So I think that was probably something that maybe was really good for your soul to experience, that there is a completely different way. And now between these two horrible edges of complete, everything has to be just so, and there is zero plan, that there's space in between. And where do you want to be?
Exactly. And I think my soul did need that experience. And I think fondly of that relationship. It
Yeah.
was funny when my husband now read the manuscript, because I didn't let him read it until it was done. And he was very like, I was like, oh my gosh, you're gonna see I had other relationships, and how
Right.
is he gonna, but he was very like playful with it too, like he could see that there's these experiences help us become who we are.
Right.
And he could see that there was meaning there.
Absolutely. Are you planning to write more?
I am. So it's interesting. I had started a second book, which was basically a sequel. I got about halfway through it and then realized like I'm still living it. And I put it on hold.
To write your memoir while you're living it, right?
I don't recommend it. So I put it in a drawer. But I am, I just completed sort of an 18-month sort of career pause, pivot, sabbatical. And I have some learnings from that I'm exploring. Like, is that part of the second book? Is it, so I'm working on it, and I don't know what that timing looks like. It's real life.
I'm glad to hear that you're continuing that.
Yeah.
And I need to know for my own personal sake, are you still doing a lot of travel?
I am. So we do, I mean, it's died down a little bit since we've had our daughter, but she's been to like a bunch of countries. She started traveling when she was 2 months old. So she gets a little bit like, when are we going on our plane next, mommy? She gets like, when are we, and how many planes are we taking? She likes,
right.
Her favorite place is Paris. We spent the summer, not this summer, but last in France. And I think that just imprinted core memories. So she's like,
right.
Can we go to Paris again?
Right. I know. And are you still dancing?
I am. So my husband and I actually taught some ballroom dance in our neighborhood because we need to find like parent friendly times.
Right.
And then I'm part of like a hip hop kind of jazz Zumba group that has been fun to just engage with other women.
Fantastic. I'm so excited to hear both of those. So, hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you're going to have a chance to win a copy of Dancing on My Own 2 Feet. Tell me something you liked or learned during this conversation and you'll be in the drawing. So Jenn, if someone wanted to reach out to you, talk to you about your writing, talk to you about your experiences, about how to get into dance, how to get into travel, how to travel alone, that's something that you and I could have a really long conversation about. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best place is my website, jenntodling.com. It has all my contact. I also have a weekly Substack newsletter, Soul Spark with Jenn Todling. So if you subscribe to that, just hit reply and I'm happy to connect with you.
Fantastic. So guys, all of that will be in the show notes. It'll be easy for you to find. Make sure you reach out to Jenn, grab a copy of her book, Dancing on My Own 2 Feet. Once you've read it and liked it, because you will, make sure that you leave a nice review for her, because reviews are something that all authors love, right? And Jenn, I want to thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Terry. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.